It hits.
So corporations pay it too.
All the way along the line.
But you remember that corporations
an extraordinary amount of money.
Will always pass it on to the folks, which is why I like the sales tax better.
Well, hang on just a second. But if you have a 2% VAT, you can pay things down awfully darn quickly.
That's
what
right.
I want is
That's right.
What I want is, this is the part of the notes.
Even putting the obvious hypocrisy of that statement aside, a value-added tax is one of the most regressive and unfair taxes you could possibly implement. A value-added tax is a series of taxes on a good which are determined by every stage of a production when the value is added. This involves the production itself, labor, machinery, transport, and more. So in other words, the more labor, machinery, and transport necessary to make and sell a product, the higher the tax will be. Take frozen and canned goods, for example, many of which poorer people rely on. Now, since they require more steps in production than fresh food, a value-added tax would make them more expensive. Such a tax would devastate the poor and the middle class by driving the cost of basic goods and services further up and further complicating an already unnecessarily complicated system. What we need is to get rid of all federal taxes, including income, property, and inheritance taxes, abolish the IRS, and replace them with a national sales tax based on a sliding scale where basic necessities are taxed very little, if all, and luxury goods are taxed a little more. Now, such a tax would be fair and prudent because it would only tax people as much as they consume and would encourage people to save their money and invest wisely. Geez, think about that, investing wisely. Well, here is Glenn Beck defending torture. Yes, defending torture.
We're talking doom and gloom. Let's move on to the show 24. Don't tell me what happened the last 2 nights because I DVR'd it. But I know you have to spill the beans a little bit because Jack Bauer apparently in the show testified before Congress. Yeah. And you talked about this on your radio show yesterday. All he does is tell the truth.
There's 2 things. And I said on the radio show yesterday, I think we're headed for another McCarthy era. I think we're headed for it. And they're not, are you a communist? Look at it. Do you disagree with what our government is doing on both sides of the aisle, these extremes on both sides? Do you disagree? Well, yes, I do. And it's going to take somebody who sits in front of Congress who's not afraid of them anymore and does what Jack Bauer did, and that is, yes, I did torture. And I'm proud of it. And it's time for these things to come out of the closet. We're talking about getting rid of Guantanamo. Well, we still have rendition. That was a Clinton era nightmare. I am pro-rendition, pro-waterboarding. No, you know what? They should be good. All you have to do is say that. Let's listen to what happened in the fictional series 24 and see if this helps build your argument. Let's listen.
I guess crimes against humanity depend on what the definition of is. Never mind the fact that Japanese and Nazi war criminals faced criminal charges for these things, which Glenn Beck is defending, because it's not torture if we do it. Now here's Glenn Beck channeling Joe McCarthy to smear Ron Paul supporters, who until con artists like him took over were the heart and soul of the Tea Party movement and the true founders of it.
In our armed forces. You know, I was thinking this morning, when you enlist in the military, you have to take an oath that says you're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. On this program, we talk a lot about the foreign threats. Maybe tonight we should spend some time on the growing domestic one. It's easy to sit back and watch television and complain that our politicians aren't listening to us, that they're lying to us about the border, about out-of-control spending, or their apparent relentless quest to hand our country over to special interests. It feels, at least to me, like our leaders reflect an America that most of us don't even recognize. Well, here's the point tonight. While our foreign enemies are the obvious ones, the physical threat may be developing domestically as well. And here's how I got there. As I told you last week, Ron Paul raised over $4 million in one day. That's huge news. His supporters raised the cash on November the 5th to commemorate Guy Fawkes. This guy was a British terrorist who tried to overthrow the government by blowing up Parliament and killing everybody in it. Paul's supporters called the donations, and I'm quoting, a money bomb. Fox was caught the very last minute, some say, with his hand on a torch about to light the gunpowder under Parliament. Now, the vast majority of Paul's supporters take this little metaphor the way it's intended, as a rallying cry to create a dramatic political shift. It's really not the way I would go, tying my movement in with a historical terrorist attack, especially in post-9/11 America. But hey, I'm a libertarian at heart. I get it. You raise money however you want, as long as you're not blowing other people up. But America, here's what you need to know tonight. Ron Paul's supporters are tapping into something that's very real. It's something that I've talked about on this program for a very long time. The rising tide of disenfranchisement in this country. And it's coming from all sides of the political spectrum. If that feeling of disenfranchisement leads to political discussion, then our system works perfectly. But if fringe elements take that disenfranchisement and turn it into violence, we endanger the freedoms we're supposedly all fighting for. David Horowitz is the author of
Oh, well, that doesn't stop Glenn Beck, though, from being a two-face and having Ron Paul on his show and be all buddy-buddy with him. Here's an example of that one.
More. Republican Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul is joining us now. Hello, Congressman. How are you?
Good. Nice to be with you.
The more I read of the Founding Fathers and the more I read your words, they're almost interchangeable. Let me start with the words of Thomas Jefferson. Here it is. I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Wanted to get you on because I don't know if futurity is a real word.
So according to Glenn Beck's own definition, he is aiding and comforting the enemy by buttering up to Ron Paul on his show, and even going so far as to quote Thomas Jefferson on how the big banks are an even greater threat to humanity than any standing army ever could be. I mean, this is what I mean by Glenn Beck pretending to be on our side when he is really a Benedict Arnold. And just to remind you of how much of a Benedict Arnold he is, I'm going to once again play the clip of Glenn Beck smearing Ron Paul supporters as terrorists
in our armed forces. I was thinking this morning, when you enlist in the military, you have to take an oath that says you're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. On this program, we talk a lot about the foreign threats. Maybe tonight we should spend some time on the growing domestic one. It's easy to sit back and watch television and complain that our politicians aren't listening to us, that they're lying to us about the border, about out-of-control spending, or their apparent relentless quest to hand our country over to special interests. It feels, at least to me, like our leaders reflect an America that most of us don't even recognize. Well, here's the point tonight. While our foreign enemies are the obvious ones, the physical threat may be developing domestically as well. And here's how I got there. As I told you last week, Ron Paul raised over $4 million in one day. That's huge news. His supporters raised the cash on November the 5th to commemorate Guy Fawkes. This guy was a British terrorist who tried to overthrow the government by blowing up Parliament and killing everybody in it.
Oh, if that doesn't say he's a Benedict Arnold, I don't know what does. Well, anyway, here's Glenn Beck flip-flopping on healthcare.
Hero. As for Mr. Beck's hypocrisy on the subject, as assembled by The Daily Show, here is Mr. Beck lately.
America already has the best health care in the world. We do take care of our sick. You're about to lose the best health care system in the world. What does it mean for the rest of the world if we lose our position as the innovator, as having the best health care in the country, in the world?
But here was Mr. Beck when something personal might have caused him to speak the truth for about 5 minutes.
I'm just at home, and I'm recovering from some surgery that was scheduled and then went horribly awry. It was one of the most